with the state of the race, which gets us to polling in the UK. Alex Podcool has been tracking all that and
Dr.
creating
Podcool.
Dr. Podcool, sorry. Yeah. My apologies. Told you I've been up all morning. Has been tracking this. Why don't you walk us through, and then maybe we have some questions for you about it.
Yeah, for sure. So we've been tracking a lot of the public polling that's been available in the UK, and just if people are interested, so a lot of the UK polling, for those who kind of just dabble with international elections, a lot of the UK polling is broken out to exclude Northern Ireland, and so most of the polls that we're looking at here are looking at Great Britain. Part of the reason is a lot of the Great Britain parties don't compete in Northern Ireland, and so we're looking pretty much just at the region of Great Britain. But because this is who's going to take over the UK House of Commons, we just call it the UK general election polling. And so what we're looking at here is we looked at all of the public polling pretty much for our overall project looks at the past year, but subset here, we're looking just back at through August 2019. And the state of the polls right now, we have the Conservatives doing pretty well, again, north of 40% of the Great Britain polling, and the Labour Party at just north of 30%. In that orange line, we have the Lib Dem. We have the Lib Dem at just north of 10, and the Scottish National Party hovering around 4 or 5%. And so the dots are individual polls that you see there. The lines are an average that we've created that weights based on the recency of the poll and the number of polls coming from a particular pollster to make sure that we have a wide variety and distribution of pollsters represented within our sample. And I think one of the most interesting things that we see here is this trend of, as the Lib Dem percentage has moved down, Labour has gone up. And not pictured here, we had a downward trend of the Brexit Party, and that perfectly correlated with the Conservative Party going up. So we are talking about a multi-party election here, but it seems to be, as the election has dragged on, a lot of the action has been focusing on the Conservative and the Labour parties.
Well, I mean, since this tracking has been started, the Conservatives started at about 30%, Labour started at just under 30%, and then the gap has widened, while both of them have gone up at the expense of the Lib Dems. And since, we've got
the Lib Dems and the Brexit Party.
And the Brexit Party, which way at the bottom there. I mean, since
No, at the bottom, that's Scottish National
I'm sorry,
Party.
Scottish National. Yeah, Brexit's not on there, but yeah. Point being, we're 4 Americans commenting on a country in which we broke away from and beaten two wars. So, should we postulate why? Why did the Lib Dems fall off so much? Anybody got anything?
Well, I mean, I think it's people who don't really like the Labour Party, but realize that Lib Dems, even though they had an opportunity to sort of grow from their 2017 performance, they weren't going to outright win. And so it was either vote for Lib Dem and sort of split the vote and let the Conservatives win, or sort of, quote unquote, come home to the Labour Party as the only other viable alternative.
And a lot of it has to do with feelings towards Brexit, right? And a little bit of a realignment. You have Labour voters that were traditionally the blue collar, the people that were striking against Margaret Thatcher, that protested denationalization of industries, that sort of old school Labour. But now you also have it being in very affluent areas, and more like the Democrats in the U.S., where it becomes a party of the higher educated. And so the Lib Dems were sort of the middle in between, but you have this tactical voting as well, right? So the coalition that the Labour is trying to put together is tough because they're kind of split down the middle on Brexit, right? There's competing influences there. Again, we talked about it last time, the more blue collar workers tend to be in favor of Brexit, and the urban elites are opposed to Brexit. And the Lib Dems were trying to take somehow sort of, thread that needle and be the party of the people that wanted to leave and, weren't necessarily old line and maybe are concerned with Corbyn personally. So there's a lot of internal tides going on, I think, between these parties and the realignment that's going on around Brexit.
Yeah, I'll agree with that, especially kind of the point of how tactical voting, I think, is going to play out. And if we look at some of the models that are out there, which we're going to get to in the next brief segment, but if we look at some of the models, some of them assume a great deal of tactical voting, others out there don't. And I think that's one thing we're all going to be paying attention to, especially as we kind of look through the exit poll results on election night. I did a little bit of a dive into some of the constituency polling, and I just kind of picked out of a hat. I saw a recent constituency poll out of Kensington from earlier this month, and it was very fascinating to look at the crosstabs and just compare those who self-ID as conservative versus Labour versus Lib Dem alongside just Brexit positions. And if you are on the Leave side, it's pretty clear where your vote's going to be. But for those who are Remainers, it's just a much more complicated thing to look at. So in that poll that I was looking at, for example, those who were Remainers went 80% for the Conservative candidate in that constituency. But then on the other side, it was pretty evenly split between Liberal Democrats and Labour, which could indicate that as we get closer to Election Day, it might be a little bit more difficult for the people who are on the Remain side to get their act together.
Yeah, and someone had mentioned sort of Corbin and the Corbin effect. I think something that's interesting in the polling is that even in places where you might have sort of a tie between Labor and Conservatives, Boris Johnson, who, in terms of favorability is pretty low, is, when asked against Corbyn, most people prefer him as a prime minister. And that's because Corbyn, even though Boris Johnson is, relatively low on favorability, Corbyn is historically low, is the lowest, I think, in at least 30 or 40 years of a major party candidate.
That sounds vaguely familiar.